Mr. Vice Chair, you ready?
Yeah.
You guys ready?
No.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Capital Budget Subcommittee of Budget and Taxation Committee. We're meeting today for the purpose of capital budget hearings, and then we're going to get a fiscal briefing. If anyone's curious about the order, it's going to be Department of Information Technology, Department of Commerce, and then we're going to hear from our fabulous Department of Legislative Services on their capital budget fiscal briefing. Of course, want to welcome back the Capital Budget Subcommittee, including Vice Chair McCray and the rest of the team. With that, and the way it's going to work is we're going to have Department of Legislative Services offer the analysis or present the analysis, and then we'll hear a response from the respective agencies. So with that, we'll now turn our attention to the Department of Information Technology, also known as DO-IT. Ms. Rao, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the members of the committee, I am Yashoda Rai, and I'll be presenting the capital budget analysis for the Department of Information Technology, or DO-IT. DO-IT's fiscal 25 capital budget includes one project, Maryland First Responders Interoperable Radio System Team, or also called as MD-FIRST. It was previously referred to as the Public Safety Communications System. It uses 700 megahertz spectrum licensed to the state by the Federal Communications Commission to provide interoperable statewide public safety radio communications for public safety first responders throughout the state. As shown here on page 1, the capital budget request for fiscal 25 for MD-FIRST is $17.88 million in general obligation bonds. On page 2, key observations. We note that the original infrastructure build of the 700 megahertz radio communication system is now complete and operational as of April 2023. These systems are forever evolving, and MD-FIRST identified deficiencies in the existing emergency communications system in fiscal 24. It received funding to address these deficiencies starting in fiscal 24. 4 sub-programs or features have been identified to fill these gaps, which include additional radio sites, installation of in-building antenna systems, redundant control sites, and an expansion of fiber optic to replace microwave transmission. Each of these sub-programs will be discussed later in the presentation. Requests and authorizations for fiscal 25 and beyond will continue to support these features. Our second key observation is that the current project maintenance contract with Motorola is expiring in November 2025. RFP has been drafted and finalization of the RFP issuance is in progress. The RFP is planned for issuance in May 2024, and the awarded bidder is expected to begin work in November 2025. The Department of Legislative Services recommends approving $17.88 million in general obligation bonds to support the 4 sub-programs to fill deficiencies in the existing emergency communication system. Moving on to updates and discussions on the project. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows the 5 phases in which the original infrastructure build of the 700 megahertz communication system were completed, the latest being phase 5 in April 2023. Phase 5 was implemented using Ethernet, while phases 1 to 4 of the system were implemented using T1 technology to contain project cost. The vendor no longer supports the T1 technology, and so an upgrade to Ethernet is required for phases 1 through 4, as MD-FIRST will no longer be able to receive system upgrades for T1 technology and becomes ineffective. DO-IT notes that the T1 to Ethernet design for phases 1 to 4 was completed in April 2023. The equipment inspections were completed in November 2023, and the site installation and implementations are underway. The project is on track to be completed in September 2025. Funds needed to complete the conversion of Ethernet has already been authorized in prior capital budget bills. Exhibit 2 on page 6 shows the capital costs for the 4 sub-programs from fiscal 24 to fiscal 29. These 4 sub-programs include additional radio sites, which are in blues, an expansion of fiber optic to replace microwave transmission in reds, redundant control sites in yellows, and installation of in-building antenna systems in greens. They aim to address deficiencies identified in the existing communication system, which are the lack of interoperability between state, local, and federal agencies, poor coverage in certain geographic areas, and the expense of maintaining multiple incompatible radio systems. The total estimated cost for the project is $92.8 million through the end of fiscal 29, and this is consistent with the estimate presented last year. Fiscal 29 costs for redundant control sites are approximately $1.5 million higher than in previous years because those costs include 2 additional prime sites, while only 1 additional prime site is included in fiscal 25 through fiscal 28. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows a list of planned radio sites from fiscal 24 to fiscal 29. These additional radio sites will help DOIT mitigate the coverage gaps it gathered through system radio coverage data. Sites identified in fiscal 24 already have approved fundings, and sites from fiscal 27 to fiscal 29 are tentative, which may be subject to change due to further site investigation activities. This subprogram receives an additional $10 million in fiscal 25 and a total of $32.8 million from fiscal 25 through fiscal 29. On page 8, we have the second subprogram, fiber optic expansion. The current communication system uses fiber and microwave backhaul to transmit voice and data between transmitter sites and over large geographical sites. Backhaul networks constructed using microwave may have performance issues during storms and extreme heat, and replacing these microwave with fiber optics mitigates these issues. This subprogram receives an additional $5.7 million in fiscal 25 and a total of $28.1 million from fiscal 25 through fiscal 29. The fiscal 25 budget includes 4 fiber projects, and there are a total of 12 projects planned from fiscal 26 to fiscal 29. On page 9, the third subprogram, geo-redundant control sites. The radio towers are grouped into 22 geographical areas to form a connected cell. Each cell has a prime site that controls and manages information while connecting that cell to the rest of the network. Adding additional control sites within each cell reduces the risk of large-scale radio coverage outage and provides redundancy if the primary controlling site is disabled due to planned or unplanned events. In fiscal 25, DOIT plans to use $1.15 million for the Anne Arundel County simulcast cell. This subprogram receives $4.9 million from fiscal 25 to fiscal 28 to add 1 geo-redundant prime each year, and $2.8 million to add 2 geo-redundant primes in fiscal 29. The fourth subprogram is in-building antennas, where MD1 uses bidirectional amplifiers to supplement radio coverage in buildings and within smaller geographic areas to improve on-street and in-building coverage. They are usually in schools, state parks, tunnels, and critical infrastructure like hospitals and government buildings. This subprogram receives $1.1 million in fiscal 25 and a total of $5.8 million from fiscal 25 through fiscal 29. Page 10 is Appendix 1, showing the operating budget impact of MD1. Fiscal 25 allowance includes $17.6 million in operating costs. The budget also includes 7 regular positions and 2 contractual full-time equivalents converted into regular positions. Cost increases are primarily attributed to expiring warranties and contractual increases. 91.1% of the operating budget is for contracts. DOIT notes that staffing requirements may be reassessed upon completion of the conversion from D1 to Ethernet. And this concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Rai, for that great analysis. Are there any questions? See, thank you very much. Secretary Savage, please come on up with anyone you want to bring from your team and start whenever you wish. Welcome.
It's great to see everyone. Thanks for having me. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Katie Savage, the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Information Technology. I'm joined today by Norm Farley, the Chief of Public Safety Communications. Thank you for giving us this opportunity this afternoon. I'd also like to thank Yasha for her excellent analysis and for her efforts and support with us through this process. DOIT, as she mentioned, has one capital project to review, and that is the Maryland First Land Mobile Radio System. Maryland First is a mission-critical public safety radio system that supports the governor's goal of creating a safer Maryland. It does so by providing public safety users with a reliable, secure, statewide, and interoperable communication system. It is a lifeline for public safety. A major accomplishment of 2023 was the completion of the Phase 5 build-out in April, which includes Montgomery, Prince George's, Calvert, Charles, and St. Mary's counties. This completed the scope of the original project and makes Maryland First truly statewide. Fulfilling its mission to be statewide and interoperable, Maryland First has become the go-to interoperability communication system for the Maryland First responder community and surrounding jurisdictions. The system now supports over 115,000 users and averages 3 million transmissions per month. Our FY 2025 capital budget request is for $17.88 million. This request includes funding for the ongoing work associated with the coverage improvement program, as well as funding to enhance system resilience and performance. We support the budget analysis presented and its recommendation. We thank the committee for its consideration and ask that our FY 2025 budget request be approved. And the staff and I stand by to take any questions.
Secretary Savage, thank you for that fantastic testimony. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Madam
Okay.
Secretary. Thank you. Committee will now turn our attention to the Department of Commerce. We'll hear from Elizabeth. Come on up. Wobel. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Weibel, and I'll be presenting an evaluation of, an analysis for the Maryland Arts Capital Grant Program within the Department of Commerce. This program awards grants to arts and culture organizations for them to carry out capital projects. It was established in 2021, and legislation mandated that the governor provide $3 million annually in fiscal 2024 through 29, either through operating or capital funds. And thus far, the program has been funded with general obligation bonds. You'll see on the first page that the plan is to continue to use bond funding to fulfill that mandate through 2029. The program is currently in its first budget year, and applications are open for the first round of grants. Eligible organizations must have an annual operating budget of under $3 million and no matching funds are required. Awards in this round will be made for furniture, fixtures, and equipment, design preparation and planning, and facility improvement. It's expected that the next round of funding will open in June with awards made in December. That concludes my analysis. I can take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you very much for that great analysis. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Good to see you, and start whenever you wish.
Thank you, Chair Zucker.
course.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody. Good afternoon, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair McCray, and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Kevin Anderson. I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Commerce. I'm here today in support of Commerce's proposed FY 2025 capital budget allowance. I'm joined today by Stephen Scarrett Davis, Executive Director of the Maryland State's Arts Council, who can help answer any questions the committee may have. I'd also like to thank Elizabeth Weibel and the DLS team for their thoughtful and thorough analysis of this proposal. Commerce's proposed capital budget consists entirely of $3 million for the Maryland State Arts Council's Arts Capital Grant Program. This program was established by the General Assembly in 2021, and the statute requires the governor to budget $3 million per year to the program from FY 2024 through FY 2029. So FY 2025 will be the second year of funding for this program, which is currently accepting applications for its first round of grants. This program allows MSAC to offer grants for the acquisition, expansion, renovation, or major repairs to a facility or other infrastructure operated by certain arts-related organizations. Grant recipients must have operating budgets under $3 million and must either participate in MSAC's grants for organizations or community arts development programs, or be open to the public and provide cultural, educational, or experiences. The MSAC team did a great job setting up and promoting this program over the past several months. So far, we have a draft submitted applications from 104 organizations in our system for the first round of grants. The application window closes this Friday, February 16th. The arts are a vital economic driver for our state. Arts and culture production contributes $12.3 billion to Maryland's economy. The arts create jobs, attract visitors, visitor spending, improve health outcomes, build understanding, and help us interpret our shared history. Through these capital funds, grant recipients can leverage additional investment to build and maintain facilities in order to deliver high-quality programs and help ensure art success for all Marylanders. We thank DLS for recommending that the full $3 million be approved, and we respectfully ask that you accept their recommendation and approve this proposal as submitted. Mr. Scarrett Davis and I would now be happy to address any questions the subcommittee may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Great program. Any questions for the secretary? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. I know that we have a public witness that's going to come up. Just a reminder that we welcome all that have signed up to testify, but we're going to stay consistent with full committee, that 2 minutes for each person testifying. And with that, Nicholas Cohen, come on up. Welcome. You guys have all been busy today.
Yeah, right. It's Maryland Arts. We planned
Absolutely.
this on the hearing day, of course. So,
Perfect.
well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and all members of the committee. My name is Nicholas Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Citizens for the Arts. We're the nonprofit organization that serves as a statewide advocacy group for public investment in the arts. Through our advocacy, we represent the interests of over 300 arts organizations, 24 arts councils, 27 arts and entertainment districts, and thousands of independent artists across Maryland. Hundreds of which we're here today for Maryland Arts Day, I think, to visit many of you directly to your offices, either with you and your staff, to support very issues like today's. The Maryland arts sector has greatly benefited from solid ongoing investment from the Maryland General Assembly and Governor Moore's administration. The arts, however, are still in a prolonged recovery that's been incredibly challenging for us all. Beyond these ongoing financial strains lies a complicated process for many small arts organizations with limited staff resources to gain access to capital investment via regular political engagement, especially at a time when needed capital investment in our venues is essential. That said, the Arts and Culture Capital Grant Program empowers these organizations to work with the Maryland State Arts Council to acquire this funding, and it also helps to streamline access to capital dollars. Also, the Arts Council is known and respected as an entity within our state government and within our arts sector. So that's why I respectfully ask the committee to fully fund the governor's proposed appropriation of $3 million to support the Arts and Culture Capital Program with the Maryland State Arts Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just make sure you say your name, and I don't think we had you registered to testify, but all good. Please go ahead. Oh, good. Okay, no problem. Go ahead. Yep.
Blame him.
Yep.
My name is Ruby Lopez Harper. I'm the Executive Director of the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, a national nonprofit emergency relief and readiness resource focused on supporting craft artists. I serve as a counselor for the Maryland State Arts Council and board member of the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County, and I'm an 8-year resident of Wheaton, Maryland. My background focuses on disaster management, arts agency infrastructure, equitable grant making, and community engagement. Access to capital funding for improvements is scarce and difficult to secure. Oftentimes, organizations lack the resources, connections, or capacity to seek and acquire funding for much needed capital improvements. This was true before the pandemic, and even more so now, considering the depletion of reserves and the continued challenges that organizations face to stabilize and return to pre-pandemic operation. This is even more true for small to mid-sized organizations, and even more acutely for organizations that are led by people of the global majority and serving communities of color. Because the Arts and Culture Capital Grant Program empowers these organizations to work with the Maryland State Arts Council to secure this funding, and because the Arts Council is committed to equitable grant making, it is a much needed resource that will strengthen these organizations and aid in their stability, growth, and demonstrate a meaningful investment through the Arts Council in the sustainability of these organizations. The Arts Council employs practices that are exemplary in furthering fair and equitable access. They provide support and assistance to organizations to navigate the process and work tirelessly to ensure outreach throughout the state. As a dedicated advocate for funding for the arts, I respectfully ask the committee to fully fund the governor's proposed appropriation of $3 million to support the Arts and Culture Capital Grant Program with the Maryland State Arts Council. This investment is a visible and vital resource that will have profound effects on the strength of the arts and cultural organizations that offer and create important experiences and opportunities for the residents of Maryland. This sends a message of value, understanding, and validation for the organizations that will ultimately benefit that the arts matter in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to testify. Was there anyone else that was that intended to testify that we may have missed? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Committee will now turn our attention to the capital budget fiscal briefing. It's Emily Haskell. Thank you. Great to see you. So you're going to tell us everything is hunky-dory? We'll see. Depends on one's perspective, right? Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, my name is Emily Haskell, and I'm here to present the capital fiscal briefing. I'll start on page 1 with an overview of the capital program for fiscal 2025, which totals $3.2 billion. This is a decrease of 26% compared to last year, but it is above the amount that had been planned in last year's CIP. You'll see there's an increase in general obligation bond funding and a decrease in the amount of PAYGO general funds. This shift is intended to relieve fiscal pressures on the state's general fund. You'll also see that special funds are decreasing in fiscal 2025. This is partially due to one-time fiscal responsibility funds that were provided in fiscal 2024, and also due in part to the decrease in expected transfer tax revenues. Federal funds, on the other hand, are increasing, and that's due to Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, both for broadband and environmental programs. Page 2 shows the same data, but broken down by spending category rather than fund source. Consistent with the overall decrease in funding, you'll see that most categories also decrease in fiscal 2025, with the exception of housing and community development, which actually increases by a little more than 50%. And I'll discuss the increase in housing funding a little later on. Page 3 shows the fiscal 2025 capital program in the context of the recent past. So while you can see there's a decrease in fiscal 2025 from the historically high levels of the past couple of years, the fiscal 2025 program is still significantly bigger than it was in fiscal 2020 or 2021. On pages 4 and 5, I'll walk through some of the highlights of the program. First, the fiscal 2025 new general obligation bond authorization level is $1.75 billion, and that's consistent with the Spending Affordability Committee recommendation. This is higher than what had been planned last year, again, as I said, to help relieve the pressure on the general fund. However, the Spending Affordability Committee recommended that authorizations increase by 2% annually to account for inflation, whereas the CIP essentially programs level funding of $1.75 billion throughout the planning period. On the bottom of page 4, you can see that the out years of the CIP also continue to limit the use of general fund PAYGO. On the top of page 5, the fiscal 2025 capital budget funds just over $100 million out of the $148 million that the legislature pre-authorized last session. The budget also allocates $50 million in GO bonds for legislative initiatives, which is significantly below the $200 million that have been recommended by the Spending Affordability Committee. The Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act contains 2 contingent reductions in general funds related to the capital program. The first is $5 million for the Business Facade Improvement Program, which the program proposes fully funding instead with general obligation bonds. Secondly, the BRFA eliminates the mandate for the School Construction Revolving Loan Fund, including $10 million in fiscal 2025. The fund still has $60 million available in fund balance from prior years. I'll talk more about transfer tax a little later, but the bottom line is that reduced transfer tax revenues result in a $215 million decrease in related capital programs in fiscal 2025. For school construction, the budget provides $906 million, half in general obligation bonds and half in built to learn bonds and special funds, which fulfills the commitment to provide an additional $450 million in capital funding. The last two bullets relate to increased funding for housing programs and federal infrastructure funds, which I'll come back to in more detail a bit later on. The chart on page 6 compares this year's CIP to last year's for the 4 years the two plans overlap. This just illustrates the increased focus on housing throughout the planning period, while funding for the environment decreases due both to changing expectations for the transfer tax, as well as decreases in out-year planned federal infrastructure funds. Pages 7 and 8 discuss capital funding in the dedicated purpose account. The fiscal 2025 budget includes $42 million in the dedicated purpose account for capital projects. That's $30 million for the Inner Harbor Promenade, $7 million for the Johns Hopkins Data Science and Computing Infrastructure Project, which is also proposed to receive $13 million in general obligation bonds, and then $5 million to begin state center demolition planning activities. As for funds previously appropriated to the dedicated purpose account, the chart on page 7 shows the status of those funds being released from the account. Of the $1.5 billion in PAYGO funds that had been appropriated in the dedicated purpose account in fiscal 23 and 24, $336 million remains available, including more than $120 million for facilities renewal across the Department of General Services, Higher Education, and Parks Critical Maintenance. Turning to page 8, there are 3 items that weren't included in that chart in the dedicated purpose account, as the BRFA proposes transferring the funding from the dedicated purpose account to the general fund. These include the 2100 Guilford Avenue project, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management headquarters, and the Conowingo Dam dredging project. All 3 of these projects have been canceled. Separately, the capital budget includes proposed deauthorizations of general obligation bond funding totaling $42.8 million for various projects that have also been canceled or have been completed. On page 9, I'll talk briefly about affordability. State policy limits debt service to 8% of revenues. The planned $1.75 billion in annual general obligation bond authorizations will increase debt service costs, but it is affordable. And as shown in the chart, it's projected to keep the debt service to revenues ratio in the low 6% range throughout the planning period. While it's affordable, I will note that the increased authorizations substantially increase debt service costs, although the full impact is not felt until about 10 years down the line due to the issuance and payment schedules. Secondly, shifting general funds to GO bonds has the effect of increasing the amount of authorizations that require taxable debt, which is more expensive than tax-exempt debt. And this is mostly due to the use of GO bonds for several programs in the Departments of Housing and Community Development and the Environment. On page 11, you can see that although regional construction inflation decreased on a year-over-year basis through December 2023, high construction inflation over the last several years means that costs are still substantially elevated compared to before the COVID-19 pandemic. This has complicated cost estimating for state-owned projects, as rising construction costs have exceeded the escalation rates used in the cost estimating process. DBM going forward has set escalation at 7.5% for calendar 2023, 5.5% for calendar 24, and 5% for subsequent years. But depending on the actual market rates, project costs as adjusted by DBM may still fall short of construction bids and require an allocation from the Construction Contingency Fund or supplemental funding in next year's capital budget. Page 12 begins the discussion of housing and community development. Across all the Department of Housing and Community Development programs, funding increases by 59% in fiscal 2025 compared to last year to a record high total of nearly $575 million. Significant enhancements include increases in rental housing funding. Rental housing programs, the funding increases by 50% to $138.5 million in fiscal 25, including $110 million in general obligation bonds. For community development programs, fiscal 2025 funding for the Strategic Demolition Fund totals $60 million in general obligation bonds, which includes $50 million for Project Core in Baltimore City, and the CIP plans $60 million annually for that program. For comparison, the previous record high funding was $30 million in fiscal 2023. Funding for the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Program, known as NED, increases from $7 million annually to $12 million annually, consistent with legislation from last session increasing the mandate. And funding for the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative, or BRNI, also increases from $12 million annually to $27 million annually. Broadband funding is also increasing as the fiscal 2025 budget includes the remaining $173 million out of the total $268 million Maryland is receiving in federal infrastructure investment and Jobs Act funds. DHCD plans to include the provisional awards for projects under that program when its final proposal is due to the National Telecommunications and Information Administration in December 2024. And the projects funded through that are expected to be completed by the end of calendar 2028. The next chart on page 13 just emphasizes that funding for DHCD increases not only in fiscal 25, but also throughout the out years of the CIP. Turning to page 14 on the environment, as I've mentioned, funding for environment programs decreases due to the estimated transfer tax revenues. This is due both to lower revised estimates for fiscal 25, as well as the budgeting of a $79.5 million underattainment from fiscal 23 revenues. The chart on page 15 shows the allocation of transfer tax revenues to capital programs. So you can see fiscal 25 includes $111 million for capital programs, which is a decrease of $215 million compared to last year. The chart on page 16 shows the anticipated Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funds for the Maryland Department of Environment capital programs over federal fiscal years 2022 to 2026. The fiscal 2025 budget includes $146 million in Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act funding, including $60 million for the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund and $86 million for the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund. Page 17 starts the discussion of facilities renewal. In fiscal 2023, available budget surplus was used to provide a record $110 million for DGS facilities renewal programs to address the backlog of projects. Of this $110 million, $65 million is still available in the dedicated purpose account. So no additional funding had been included in fiscal 24 or the 2025 budget. The chart shows that the backlog has increased slightly in the last year, although DGS has been able to increase the pace of encumbrances under the program in recent years, including nearly $33 million in the first half of fiscal 2024. The chart on page 18 shows the components of the backlog broken down by agency, with DGS, the Department of Public Safety, and the Maryland Department of Health accounting for the largest shares. On page 19, you can see the University System of Maryland facilities renewal is funded through an allotment of $30 million annually of USM academic revenue bonds. In addition, last year, USM had planned for the use of $100 million in USM plant funds above what institutions were providing, but this $100 million is eliminated in this year's plan. General obligation bond funding remains unchanged at $22.5 million over the 4-year period of overlap. The chart on page 20 shows the total funding for USM facilities renewal from all sources, including operating funds contributed by the institutions. Page 21 shows a facilities condition index by institution, as well as the change from 6 years ago. A lower FCI is better, and you can see half of the institutions improved their facility condition index over this period. Page 22 shows a quick look at facilities renewal funding at other higher education institutions in the state. The light blue shows the most recent 6 years of funding, whereas the darker represents the 5 years that are planned in the current CIP. Finally, on page 23, there's a discussion of transportation funding outside of the Transportation Trust Fund. In recent years, funding in the capital budget has been increasing for projects that would be eligible for funding through the Transportation Trust Fund. The largest components of that are WMATA grants, the FBI headquarters project, and the Howard Street Tunnel, but there's also a growing number of local projects. The fiscal 2024 budget also included $100 million in rainy day funds and $100 million in the dedicated purpose account for transportation initiatives. The fiscal 2024 budget included $100 million in GEO bond funds for the FBI headquarters project, and the fiscal 2025 budget also includes a further $100 million. This funding will support construction of an interchange along I-95, I-495 at the Greenbelt Metro Station, as well as other improvements necessary to relocate the headquarters. The project is included in the Consolidated Transportation Program, which projects that $23.5 million in GO bond funds will be needed through fiscal 2025, $96.5 million in fiscal 26, and $80 million in fiscal 27, based on the anticipated cash flow of the project. The fiscal 2025 budget also includes $20 million in general obligation bonds for the Howard Street Tunnel project. And the remaining GO bond contribution of $31.5 million is planned for fiscal 2026. That's a total of $125 million provided using general obligation bonds or PAYGO funds out of the nearly $250 million state contribution for the $565 million project. Lastly, the governor is required to contribute $167 million annually for a dedicated capital grant to WMATA to be used for state of good repair projects. General funds or GO bonds have funded a portion of these costs since fiscal 2020, as you can see in the chart on page 25. The fiscal 2025 budget funds the $167 million using GO bonds. However, these funds cannot be used directly for the mandated grant, which is used by WMATA to pay debt service on bonds it has issued. Instead, the funds will be used for a portion of the state's base capital grant to WMATA, which frees up an equal amount of Transportation Trust Fund special funds to be used for the mandated grant. That's all I have for you today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator Risbett.
Back on page 19, under USM facility renewal. Comparing the 2023 to 2024 CIP, a whole lot of green, $100 million of USM plant funds went away. Do we have any idea the context of that?
I don't know that personally, but I will follow up on that for
Great,
you.
thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Haskell, I just wanted to congratulate you. I think this was your first time. I mean, you're not new to the General Assembly, but this is your first time presenting. You did an absolutely fantastic job. I'm not surprised, but you did a great job and appreciate it. And Matthew Klein, I see you over there, and appreciate all your work too. All DLS, and absolutely. Well, it's a good team. Seeing no more questions, that concludes today's capital budget briefing and hearings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.